The American Theater Wing and the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts bring you the American Theater Wing's Guide to Careers in the Theater. This session, the Casting Director.
Hello, I'm Ted Chapin with the American Theater Wing, and with me is Casting Director Jim Carnahan.
Hello.
Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
I should start by saying that you are not only the Casting Director of the Roundabout Theater, but one of Broadway's preeminent casting directors, represented by several shows on Broadway and a couple coming up. Let's start at the beginning. I'd love you to define for us what a casting director is and what the responsibilities of a casting director are.
Basically, it's a matter of being the middleman between the director and the actors, or the director, the producers, and the actors, depending on the situation. So that our basic job is to, as you begin a show, define a list of actors, which you write out to submit to the director for his approval or discussion, of actors who seem right for the parts. You deal with the agents to set up the auditions. You then run the auditions. You bring the actors into the room. You schedule the callbacks. You're basically the go-between between actor and director.
So you sort of direct the casting, as the title
direct the
says.
casting, exactly, and try to direct the room as well as you can as well.
Now, obviously, one doesn't sort of come full-blown onto the world as a casting director. But I guess one of my curious first questions is, did you always know you wanted to be a casting director?
No, actually, I was an agent for many years. I was an agent here in New York and then an agent in California. And woke up one day and went, I want to go back to the theater and I want to work in casting. And called Todd Hames, who's the artistic director of the Roundabout Theater, and said, I want to come back to New York and I want to work in casting at your theater. And it all worked out. But it was for years people had said to me that I was too much of a casting director as an agent, because I wouldn't push the wrong actors. I would always kind of go, well, this one seems right for the role, so maybe you should think about this one. So but there used to be, there were quite a few actually, agents who became casting directors and casting directors who became agents, because they're kind of interchangeable fields in many ways, because you're dealing with actors and your knowledge of actors is an important part of either of those jobs.
And you should like actors for both.
And you should like actors for both.
Well, obviously part of that is instinct, because if you as an agent were instinctively trying to find the right person, did you begin your career secretly wanting to be a director or an actor?
No, never. I actually just wanted to be in this business and came to New York and thought I'll be an agent, because I loved actors. Never wanted to be one, but loved actors. And so I thought agenting would be the proper way to do it. And then as the years went on, I decided to change and go into casting, which is actually much more fulfilling vis-a-vis working with actors, because you're actually much more involved in it.
But if somebody were interested in being a casting director, would you advise them to take one particular route?
No, I mean, the way most casting directors become casting directors is they start as casting interns in casting offices. Almost all of my associates started as interns, and every casting office has interns, particularly in the not-for-profit world, but in the offices that do strictly commercial work as well all have interns, and that's how everyone else I know has kind of started.
And do you feel that the interns are interning at a casting director because they like to be casting, or do you think it's a sort of an entrance into the entire Broadway theater or off-Broadway theater, or whatever?
I think it's an entrance into the theater, and it's an entrance into the artistic side of the theater. There aren't that many jobs on the artistic side, particularly in not-for-profit theater. In not-for-profit theater, you basically have an artistic director, a casting director, and a literary director, and that's your artistic staff. Whereas the financial side or the development side there's lots of people that support a theater. But on the artistic side, there are very few. So for kids that are interested in looking at the artistic side, a lot of people who want to be directors will come in and intern as a casting director, because most directors will tell you somewhere between 75 and 90% of the job of making a show good is casting the show properly.
So you would encourage the idea of somebody who thinks he or she wants to be a director to be an intern at a casting
It's
office.
Always a very good idea. I mean, it really does give you a sense of how it works, and you also get to work with the directors. So, and then what I've seen is some of my associates have decided they don't want to be directors and will stay and become casting directors. And I think I've had 3 of them now that go off and leave me and go assistant director, major Broadway director, and then they'll come back when I need them for projects and stuff like that. But you'll find that a lot of casting directors wanted to be directors. That seems to be, I'm an exception to that, but many of them started wanting to be directors, actually.
Are there any things, any ultimate goals in the theater that you think would be a bad idea for someone to want to be and then come to a casting office as an intern?
No, because I mean, it's a little dangerous having someone who wants to be an actor in a casting office. That could be a little dangerous, but it's also incredibly enlightening. You know, we've had that too, as for our interns have oftentimes been actors, and it will scare many a person off of being an actor by working in a casting office.
Not a bad idea necessarily.
Not a bad idea, because you realize how tough it is and what tiny little threads an actor's life hangs by. And that's something you get a real sense of when you work in a casting office. It's the agent pushing someone, the director's mood, the casting director's mood. And those things really affect who get jobs. So we've had a lot of actors as well start that way.
I know that you have a unique position, which I want to talk a little bit about, because you are the Roundabout's casting director, and also you are artistic advisor title as well, I believe, which I assume came after a period of time when you proved yourself invaluable to the institution.
Well, it's also not for profit. They give you titles instead of money. It's a whole, it's a whole thing with not for profit, but
that's very important. But you also operate as an independent casting director, and you have a relationship with Roundabout that lets you to do that, allows you to do that out of your office at Roundabout. But what I was going to ask is there a difference in the way casting directors are paid in the not-for-profit theater at Roundabout as you are, and in the commercial world?
Well, what happens at Roundabout is I'm given a staff salary, which is I would imagine probably in the middle to high echelon of what not-for-profit salaries are. And I think most casting directors at the New York theaters probably are. We're certainly below the development director and the artistic director and the managing director. But we probably fall right underneath that category, So it's that kind of higher echelon of the middle salary range of not-for-profit. And then in commercial theater, it can vary. I mean, it depends on your experience. It depends on your agent. We do have agents.
And an association I want to get to in a moment.
Yes, but, for a straight play, you tend to make $10,000 to $17,500, something like that.
As a fee?
As a fee.
And what does that fee cover?
That fee covers the casting of the show up to the first preview. So it includes all the consultations, all the lists, all the auditions, all the principal casting, and all the understudy casting. And then, so for a straight play, I'd say somewhere between $10,000 and $17,500. For a musical, it's somewhere between $17,500 and, I would imagine, I haven't gotten this yet, but I imagine people do get up to like $35,000, depending on what the show is and what your relationship is with the producer.
Why would a musical be more expensive?
Musicals take a lot more time, and there are a lot more people.
In terms of cast, or just the people who are on your side of the table making the decision?
In terms of cast and in terms of who's on the other side of the table. I mean, musicals are much more difficult to cast. In that, in a straight play, you tend to have, at most, you have a writer, a producer, and a director. That's the most you have on the other side of the table. And with as many revivals, certainly as the Roundabout does, the author is usually not present. Right. And even in the case of London transfers, I've done both Copenhagen and the initial Broadway production of Copenhagen and the revival of Noises Off, and in neither case was Michael Frayn involved. When I cast the revival of True West just recently, Sam Shepard wasn't involved. So it's always kind of an awkward thing, because you walk up at the opening night party and say, "You don't know me, but we've just done the show together." But
shame on them; they should be there.
It's much. Well, it's their trust of the director. I mean, because in both cases, the productions had been done, all three cases, I should say, the productions had been done before, in all three cases done in London. And so there was a certain amount of trust with the director, and so they put all the power in the director's hands at that point.
So you really are a collaborator. A casting director really is an important collaborator.
More particularly, I think, on straight plays, more so on straight plays. We've done a couple of Pinter plays at the Roundabout, and Harold is always informed of what's going on, but he's not present,
But wouldn't a straight play be more time-consuming simply because, I mean, in a musical, someone can sing and they're out of there. They can't cut it, you know, and then you can bring them back. But I would think somebody doing a straight play audition must take longer.
It can't. The other thing that tends to happen in straight plays is that they, especially commercially and also in the not-for-profit world, who are we kidding, they tend to be more star-driven than musicals do. So the amount of time you spend is not so much time in the audition room as it is time on lists and making offers to stars, or trying to see if a star is interested. That's particularly true of small cast plays. Right. Not as true of larger cast plays. Right. I mean, Noise's Office is a good example where a lot of the cast came from the audition room, and a couple of the people of the title did not come from the audition room. Yeah. And in musicals, you tend to see every role. We don't have that many musical theater stars. And so, you know, a lot of musicals are cast-driven. I mean, are cast totally in the room. The days of doing a musical around a star, unless it's a revival, are over as far as I can tell. You know,
I just want to finish up the money. In addition to the fee, do you get a royalty?
You then get a royalty every week, which can be for straight play is somewhere usually between $250 and $750, and for a musical is somewhere between $750 and $1250.
And for that, are you on call for
You're
replacements?
on call for everything. You're on call for replacements. If they need lists, they're dodgy areas. Like if they are starting to think about a tour, they don't actually pay you for the tour, but because you're doing the Broadway show, you'll kind of do lists for the tour and stuff like that, unless the tour gets officially set up, which is unusual.
But if it is, are you often the casting director of the tour? If
You're always guaranteed you are always guaranteed first refusal on any future production that is under the auspices of the same producer.
And now there is a casting society.
There is. It is not a union yet. It is called the Casting Society of America, the CSA, and we're slowly moving towards possibly becoming a union. And one of the things that, vis-a-vis fees, there are no set minimums. There is no standardized contract. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to get a standardized contract. Because when you go to negotiate, we all kind of rely on each other. Well, how much did you get? It's kind of, there are no set rules, and we're trying to make some set rules for that.
Do you see yourselves joining forces with some other union? Because I know some of the theatrical unions have press agents and managers, and stage managers are with equity and stuff.
I think that's part of what is going on, is approaching certain unions about whether we would fit into the profile of their union. And so that's a process that's starting. It's, I would say, just in the beginning stages, but hopefully it will happen because there should be minimums. There should be rules about things like that. Particularly, one thing that will happen is you'll cast a show in a regional theater. My partner at the Roundabout, Amy Christopher, cast for Williamstown. She's the casting director for the Williamstown Theater Festival, and they've had quite a few shows come in over recent years, and she's always ended up casting the shows as they've come in. But you're not protected at all. There's no amount of money that you're... And it's a way for producers to save money oftentimes, is they'll take a cast from a regional theater and not pay the casting director properly.
Yeah, well, that's why the organizations like the Casting Society of America get formed.
Exactly.
So please, don't mess up. Now, obviously, as a casting director, you have to coordinate with, among other things, Actors' Equity's rules. They have fairly strict rules about casting, do they not?
Well, they have, again, more so they have rules about, there are more rules for musicals because there are chorus rules. And there are, what you do have to do in every case is, you always have to do a set of open auditions for equity members before you can begin casting, before you can begin regular casting sessions, appointment casting sessions, if you will. And for musicals, you have to have both a chorus call and you have to have what are called equity principal auditions.
That's a rule set by equity, right?
That is a rule set by equity.
Do you, as the casting director, have to be there in person, or can you send a deputy?
One of my associates can go instead of me.
And is it 1 day, 2 days, or does it?
It depends on the show and depends on how many. Normally, the rule is 3. It depends on the show as to whether they will bring it. You ask for dispensations if you're casting a 2-character play and there's a star attached.
Yes,
you don't need 3 days. So, they also tend to be, in my experience, for musicals, they actually tend to be quite useful, especially the chorus calls. I've never done a Broadway musical or a musical at the Roundabout that someone from the open chorus call, did not end up in the show. So they are very valuable. The open chorus calls for musicals are indeed very valuable.
And do they tend to be, obviously they have to be equity members.
Right.
Only, right?
Yes, although you can wait till the end of the day. If you're a non-equity member, you can wait till the end of the day, and if time permits, they will see you. On certain shows, like Cabaret, which I've been casting for many years, we always saw those people because the specificity of what we were looking for was such that you wanted to see everybody because you were looking for something so specific. I'm sure the same thing would apply in a case like Rent.
Right, instrument playing,
or
sleazy
looking
looking.
for very young people, that
Right.
sort of thing. You would encourage the non-union people to come, wait till the end of the day, and then see them either that day or reschedule them for another time.
So certainly you as a casting director, an important New York casting director, would give advice to young actors to come and go to any of those if you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly the musicals. Straight plays tend to be a little different. Although we have found young actors, when you're looking for young actors, they can sometimes come in handy, particularly for understudies.
Yeah.
Do
you okay, now as a casting director with your own office,
right.
Do you have open calls? Just to see, how...
No. What you do is, what happens, the way you start a show is, you'll break down the list of characters. You'll take the script and you'll break down the list of characters, giving specifics of what you're looking for in each case. With classic plays, you tend to be a little...
the
director.
Okay.
I should be clear about that. The first thing you do is you sit with the director.
He hires you, or the producer hires you, but obviously a relationship with the director is key.
It depends. Sometimes I'm brought in by the director, many times. At the Roundabout, they're given me.
Right.
They have no choice. So when a director comes to the Roundabout, I am either myself or Amy. We will either cast it separately or we will cast it together. On a commercial show, I am sometimes hired by the producer first. Oftentimes what will happen is that it's a director I have a relationship with and they will request me and then the producer will hire me. But more and more I find that producers are hiring casting directors in the beginning to flesh out lists. I've been hired before directors, particularly on musicals in development, because they'll want to hear it first and they'll want to have directors see it. So I've, in some cases, in musicals in particular, been brought on before the director is brought on.
So then,
for the best.
What?
Then you just hope for the best when the director gets there.
So, but the place of the director is in that instance taken by the writers, I would assume.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
if you're going to have a dialogue with somebody about what are you looking for here, it would be the...
You always start with the director. And so basically the first step in any project is you read the script and then you sit down with the director and go, okay, exactly what is it we're looking for? Can it go this way? Can it go that way? Non-traditional, colorblind, all of that those sorts of questions one has to answer. And then I will sit down and write down a breakdown of each of the characters, describe the characters, and any specifics we're looking for. Obviously, on musicals, you try to include vocal ranges and that sort of thing. That's then posted. It's sent out by a service called Breakdown Services to all the agents and managers in both New York and Los Angeles. And we get submissions. They then type up with these names, the names of the actors that they think are appropriate. They send the pictures and resumes to us, and that's what we start from. Mm-hmm. There are also, obviously, lists that I've generated beforehand, so before you get to that step, you've called about X number of actors. That breakdown is also what appears in the trade papers for the EPAs, which is what the equity auditions are called, equity principal auditions. So it's the same thing so that the union members who don't have agents or want to come to the open calls know exactly what it is we're looking for. So that's the first step. And then the second step is going through and looking through those submissions and knowing the people you want to bring in. And then what tends to happen is agencies will have new people that you don't know, and you'll do something called a pre-screen, in which the director is not there, and it's just me or me and my casting associate. Sometimes on a musical it's me and the musical director. And you'll go through the new people to see who you want to bring in for the director. So that's how you keep track of new talent.
And that would be 1 day's worth of pre-screening, and, and everybody would know that's what it is, right?
Yes, 1 day or 2 days, depending on the project. Again,
but they wouldn't be interspersed within a day of other things.
No, they would not. They would be something separate, and they usually precede whatever you're doing with the director. I just cast a revival of Into the Woods, and we pre-screened, I think it was 300 girls for Little Red Riding Hood. Oh. And a similar number of boys for Jack, because it's a young role. You're looking for a kid. There aren't going to be that many people with experience. Whereas, for roles like The Baker's Wife or The Witch, there were no pre-screens, because anyone that I was going to bring in for those roles are people that I'm going to know and know their work. So it depends on the project as to how many of those you do.
Now, how other than the pre-screens, do you keep up on new talent? Do you go to the theater?
You go to the theater almost every night of your life.
Do you ever stay home?
Not often. And when you are staying home, you're watching a movie so that you can keep up with those actors as well. It's that old thing of your avocation becoming your vocation. Be careful what you wish for, because it will happen if you're a 13-year-old child dreaming of, oh, God, it would be so great to be in New York one day and go to the theater every night, and then you realize, grow up and you go to the theater every night and go, oh, God, do I really have to go again tonight?
It's like, I am the tired businessman.
Exactly. And your holidays truly become busman's holidays. You go to London and you see 10 shows in 8 days, and that's your holiday. So, but it is the most exciting thing. I mean, there's nothing like finding an actor that you don't know their previous work and seeing, my God, that person's fantastic. It's ego-wise more exciting when you see it in an audition room than when you see it on a stage cast by somebody else, but nonetheless, it's always exciting.
Now, if you do see somebody in a pre-screen or something, and you get excited about it, do you deal with the directors differently as to whether can you say to some directors, this is the most exciting person I've seen, or do you have to take a sort of, here's a list of 8 people, and have that director come to the conclusion?
Well, one of the most difficult things about being a casting director is that for every director, you have to be a different kind of casting director. And you can't be the same, you can't handle every show the same way as a casting director, because every director is different. And it totally depends on the director as to how you do that. Some of the directors I work with often are, in fact, among my closest friends. Others I have a very cordial, but it is still, we are business associates, we are not. So it depends on the director as to how that goes. Also, you never oversell, because there are very few directors who want a casting director to cram an idea down their throat. Our job really, basically, at the beginning, is to bring them into a room. That's our job.
Right.
And our job is not to cram. Our job is not to force. Our job is not to try to build it that way. It's to see what the director responds to. The first session is always like the first day of school, because you don't quite know what it's going to be. You don't know what the room is going to, if it's a director you haven't worked with. You don't know if he's going to be warm to actors or a little more removed from actors. You don't really know, you think you know exactly what he's looking for. But until you've been in a room with a director and seen a first day of people, it's, oh, so that's the way he's going with this role. Because with many roles, you can go many different ways. So you try to bring in an assortment and then see which way the director goes towards.
So the kind of personal qualities that you feel a casting director should have, being an enormous egomaniac who comes into the room and announces what's right, doesn't go on that list.
It doesn't fly with any of the people I've worked with, let me say. Sometimes you have to be a little cagey with directors, but you can never, I've never known when you can force one into it. You can kind of slide them into it sometimes, and you usually need a producer's help for that. There's a myth that, we have a certain amount of power in that we do control many of the people get into the room, but we don't decide who gets hired. That's not our job. That's the director's job and or the producer and writer's job.
But of course, if it is somebody that you've discovered and you've been there quietly, you can jump up and down, yay, if the director says.
There are people like, an example for me right now is Katie Finneran, who's an actress that I have adored for years since I saw her do a very small part in The Heiress.
Not a roundabout production.
Not a roundabout production, cast by Daniel Swee, who was always a big Katie Finneran fan. And through the years, I've used Katie Finneran in readings and introduced her to directors. And there would be times in readings, because you usually don't have auditions for readings, but Katie was not a known commodity. And I would say to directors, that is the case when you will do that. meet this actress before we cast it. She's exactly what you're looking for.
Right.
And Katie did a few readings through that, and I cast her, and she's been cast in a couple of things at the Roundabout. And then she got cast in Noises Off, which has changed her career, and that's a thrilling feeling, you know. And that was a case where, when I was assigned the job, it's like, there's only really one person who can really play this part, and it's Katie.
But again, in that instance, did you urge that the director meet her and talk to her, or have her audition, or?
She auditioned, and other people auditioned as well. And in fact, it came down to between two people. There were two different ways to go, and he, on his own, decided to go Katie instead of with the other actress, which would have been a totally different take on the role.
But am I also right that when that decision is made, it's probably to your advantage not really to tell that director that you'd wanted her from the very beginning?
Most of the time.
Just to say, great.
I mean, there are times, it's like, there are times when you, again, depending on the director, you can say, this is who, especially if you're up against the wall. Occasionally, a casting director is called in to help out on another project with a director. And when you're very close to a director, you can say, this is the person I think you're going to want to hire.
Right.
But that's based on having worked with that person quite a few times and knowing what their taste is and knowing who they're going to respond to and who they're not going to respond to for the most part.
Now, I mean, you are a human being. You have your own tastes,
Right.
as we all do. Are there actors, and I don't want names, are there actors that whose work you just don't fancy and really don't want to come in?
Yes.
That's the first half of the question.
Right.
The second half of the question is if a director or a producer says, I'd like to see that person.
You always bring them in.
Right.
And there are certain people that, I mean, that is one of the more difficult things about casting, that aren't to your taste, but because of where they are in the business, or because other people obviously like them because they work a lot, you feel like it's part of I feel like it's part of my job to bring them in. Now, I've usually had directors respond to them the same way I have. That's one of the trickiest things about being a casting director, is praying and that you and the director's taste align. I have had one occasion where that did not work, and it was not a pleasant experience for me, because I would sit in the same room with the director, and the director would see one thing and I would see another, and ultimately the director cast the show. So, you know, there are those of us who want asterisks by names and programs going, we didn't really want this person. The director insisted, but you can't do that. Right. So you take the good with the bad.
But then if that director, if there's a choice in the future and that director asks for you and you're busy, that's okay.
Yes, that's okay.
Is that a nice way to put that?
Yes, exactly. But usually that won't happen, because it is the sort of relationship where you know the relationship is working or the relationship isn't working. And you know, there are certain directors that I have a really wonderful relationship with, and I will probably do most of the shows that they cast, unless they go to another theater that has a staff casting director, such as Lincoln Center or Manhattan Theater Club or the Public.
Now, this is a question that fascinates me. Most auditions are held in a theater, correct or not correct?
They're not. In fact, they're almost never held in a theater anymore. And interestingly enough, I just had a director say to me, I will never do auditions, final callbacks in an audition room again. I've never done final auditions at anything but an audition hall.
Which
with the exception...
vary in size. I mean, some of them can be very small.
Yes. We have... I remember once at the Roundabout, there was an actress that had it was a young role. And it was an actress who had basically done television and film. It's not an embarrassing story. I can mention her name. It's Brittany Murphy. And she came into the room and read with Anthony LaPaglia for View from the Bridge, and we freaked out because she didn't have much theater on her resume, but it's the role of Catherine in View from the Bridge, and it's a very young role. She's amazing, but can she fill a theater? So we actually did those callbacks on our stage for Arthur, because the callbacks were for Arthur Miller, to see if Brittany could indeed fill a theater, that it wasn't just someone who could act on film. So in those cases, you do it. You will do that with an actor that has basically done film or television to see if they can fill a theater. It's an old-fashioned approach, actually. It's also very expensive, which is the reason most producers don't do it.
To get into the theater,
to get into the theater. Even if you're in there are union costs involved, and you have to have someone from the union there. So it's expensive. In a rehearsal hall, you don't need anyone. So they're not done, actually, typically, in a theater.
But do you have a studio in your office?
No. We have rehearsal space at the Roundabout, and then there are various rehearsal spaces around town that you will rent.
And in a commercial situation, you are responsible for planning those auditions and finding the hall, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the producer pays for it, but
the producer pays for it, but you arrange all those things. Same thing at the Roundabout. I mean, oftentimes our rehearsal space, our spaces are filled with shows that we are rehearsing, so I have to look for outside space. That's another lovely thing about casting a musical, something we were alluding to earlier, is that juggling the schedules of a musical director, a choreographer, a producer, a writer, a composer, a lyricist, and a director can be a logistical nightmare.
When three of them live in London anyway.
Yes, exactly. Although, you know, directors, especially directors with limited availability, people will tend to rally and kind of come to the fore there. But musicals, that's another reason why musicals are so difficult is, you know, final callbacks for a new musical, you can have 20 people in a room making a decision and 20 people having a voice in that decision. And
is there always a leader,
The leader should in an ideal world, the leader is the director. That is the way it should always be. And in my case, it has usually been that. I can think of very few examples where ultimately, you know, the director doesn't listen to everyone's advice, particularly the ones that are very apt politically, and most of them are. They wouldn't be successful directors.
Politically, among the people.
Among the people. And they listen to everyone, and then they'll go, I understand your point, I understand your point, but I believe that this is the most important thing, and therefore we will hire this person. It can be difficult. There are producers commercial producers, that can be particularly demanding about names. That's something that will happen a lot with directors, where this is constant debate in commercial theater with straight plays. You know, go for the name or go for the actor that can do it. You'll tend to find your director saying, I need actors who can make this play work, and if we make this play work, it will become a success. And producers saying, no, we must have stars. When we cast Copenhagen here, there was great fear amongst the producers that if we did not have box office names, that a play about nuclear fission would not work. And Michael Blakemore was insistent that, I mean, there were a couple of stars on the list that he was happy to go to. And when those stars passed, he was insistent on having solid New York actors in that show. And of course, and the producers all thought we were going to tank. And the show, I think, paid back in 16 weeks and, you know, now has 2 tours out.
Right.
And that was a case of a director saying to the producers, no, I know that I need good, solid actors, not stars.
Now, how did you chime in on that debate in Copenhagen?
That was a very difficult one for me because I was again, you're the middleman. So I was the person in that case, the producers saying, get me lists of stars. So you do the list of stars for the producers. You have to. It's your job. They pay you. You check those interests. You then say to the director, these are the people that they want me to check on. This is what I found out. And then you're, in that case, you know, you also get to say to the producer, this is what the director wants. So in cases like that, it can be a very tense position to be in. And it depends on the power of your director as to who ultimately wins that battle.
And when you're in an audition and you have gone through the list, whatever the list is, stars or not,
right.
and it is dry, and that's your list, and nobody wants anything, and you go back to your office, what do you do to come up with a new list?
You go through everything. And it is rare, I think, that you say there is no one else. Usually what a casting director will say, or what I will say is, I can show you more people. I don't think there's anyone else of the quality that we've seen, but if you want to see more people, I will do that. That's my job, you know?
But are there agents who you have a special relationship with, or are there people in your office who you would say, does anybody, I mean...
Oh, well, you do that all the time. I mean, I have a staff. I mean, I have a partner at the Roundabout, Amy Christopher, and then I have 2 associates and an assistant. So when you're stuck, you just scream out, well, any of us, whichever project we're going, we'll just go, okay, help.
Yeah.
And you call other casting directors. Casting directors are very good about that.
You're a collegial group?
Absolutely. You know, I will call Jay Binder. I will call Daniel Swee, who are 2 friends of mine who are also casting directors. They will call me. You know, we'll call each other and go, okay, I'm out of ideas. Here's what I've come up with. Who else can you think of? And we always help each other.
That's not an insignificant little statement, I think, because I think there are parts in the theater that aren't that collegial.
It's very collegial, and it's also something you can then say to directors to ease their mind. You know, you will say, I've gone over my list, and I've called Jay, and I've called Daniel, and gone over their list for this part, and None of us can come up with another idea. It's also a way of, if directors are stuck, they'll pick up a phone and call a casting director they've worked with before. So it's also, in some ways, a way of covering your butt.
Right.
Because then you've done it, and
Right.
you've said, look, I have no problem. If he's not happy, I have no problem calling anyone and asking for advice. The agent thing is a different matter. There are some agents, very few I must say, that if they say you must see this person, I would bring them directly in for a director. That's unusual. Because for the most part, if it's someone I don't know, there's no reason why they won't come in and pre-screen for me. Agents are one of the trickier parts of being a casting director, particularly when you're at upper echelon people, or your stars, if you will, or when you're at young people who are just beginning that they think are going to be movie stars. And you have to be very careful with agents to make sure you're getting the proper response from the actor.
From the actor, not from the agent.
Yes. In that, an agent will say, no, they don't want to do that. They're not interested in theater at this time. It's a big line you'll get.
Because the agent wants to hold them for Hollywood.
For Hollywood.
But
for
the
television,
actor,
film. But the actor may not know that this is being offered. In fact, in many cases, when I meet with, or when Todd and I meet with, Todd Hames, who's the artistic director at the Roundabout, when we meet with a star, they will give us their home number and say, if it's a play, call me directly. Don't call my agent. Don't call my manager. Call me. Because the theater doesn't pay as much as TV and film, and so agents don't make any money off of people doing theater. I mean, in very, very rare, with very rare exceptions. So they don't want that. So one of the odder things about being a casting director, and this is where, in my case, being an agent came in handy, is learning to suss out the truth. Learning to tell when an agent is telling you the truth and when you're not quite sure. And then you become a detective and try to get the actor's home number from someone else and make sure you've gotten in touch with the actor to make sure they really knew that this was a possibility and what they really wanted. It's one of the odd quirks of being a casting director.
But I also assume that the Roundabout now has an extraordinary history of stars, if you will,
Yes.
who come to New York and are in a play for a period of time, eligible for Tonys and stuff like that. I would imagine that agents would get to understand that, or is it still the same old thing?
They do. No, they do. And certain agencies are much better about it than they used to be. But it's still something you have to feel out. It's something that comes in handy. Interestingly enough, my not-for-profit work comes in handy with commercial producers because I do have a relationship with the agents that handle stars because of the array of actors that have worked at the Roundabout. And that is another reason producers hire you. They hire you for your connections with agencies. Who can get an agent? Again, we're talking the upper echelon people. Who can get an agent on the phone, get the phone calls returned, and get the answers? And that's another reason a producer will decide to hire a casting director instead of casting director B. Those relationships.
It's interesting. Do you feel that being a casting director at being based at a not-for-profit, puts you in a different position vis-a-vis the commercial world? I mean, if you do a Broadway show, will the call still be thought of as, oh, that's just the not-for-profit guy, even if you have something for a star to offer that might be?
Because I've done so many commercial shows, and the Roundabout has had. One of the reasons I started doing commercial shows was the Roundabout had a season in which I think we had 4 shows moved, 3 shows moved, 4 shows, and in the space of a year moved to Broadway and convert to Broadway shows, proper production contract. And I think from that, that's how I got to know a lot of commercial producers. But no, because agents are used to that, and there are advantages to both. Many stars prefer the not-for-profit route these days because even though we pay $1,000 a week or whatever it may be, it's 16 weeks. So there's a short commitment. They get to do a play they've always wanted to do. Not-for-profit can offer them the chance of doing, we just did a production of The Women, which is 28 people. We did Man Who Came to Dinner for Nathan Lane a year ago, which also, I think, had 32 people in it. You couldn't do that as a commercial producer. And if you did do it as a commercial producer, the actor would have to sign for a run of a year because it would be like being in a musical. So they get offered things that they can't get offered in the commercial world, and therefore they'll go not-for-profit.
In your Roundabout position, do you have, Katie Finneran, for example,
right.
Do you find somebody like that and think, that's Eliza Doolittle now, or do you have a part that you think somebody like that should play, and then you can say to Todd, you know, let's put this together, starting with the casting idea.
You tend to do that with stars. You don't tend to do that with people who aren't. I mean, that's just a cold, hard fact of the theater business, and that's commercial and not-for-profit. You can have favorite actors, you know. The public actually does. Around favorite actors as opposed to star actors, forgive me. So that, you know, not so much. I mean, what you do is when you first know you're doing a project, there will be your favorite actors that you go, wow, wouldn't it be great if I can get this person this job?
Now, we're in an era where there's a lot of colorblind casting, and a lot of people like it. Is the role of casting director something that's open to minority people and women? And
absolutely. I mean, absolutely. The casting director positions itself, there are very few, oddly enough, African American casting directors in theater. In fact, I can't think of one in theater. There are quite a few in television and film. But casting was always a position, one of the first positions that women could rise to power in any of the industries in. It was one of the first ones that was really open to women, casting was, in LA. And
why do you think that is?
I think because it is a position that has become more important over the years. So it's not a position that was identified as a male position in the beginning, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. It is a position that has grown in importance over the years. And so it was, because it was a little more amorphous, it was a way women could get into the business when things were much more of a boys' club.
Just generally more of a boys' club.
Just generally more of a boys' club. We'll let the little girl do the casting because we're really going to decide that. Mm-hmm. Casting has become much more important than that and much more vital force, but it is a way women got in. But multicultural casting is actually one of the other things that happens. It's a very important part of the beginning of a casting process, which is, are we open to, you know, and this is a really thorny issue for directors and casting directors. If you're doing a Shaw play, and it is specifically set in a time and place, and it's about the social mores of that time and place, is multicultural casting appropriate?
Right.
You know, and that is a major topic of debate, discussion, conversation, argument amongst the unions, amongst directors, amongst, you know, that may be the single thorniest issue in casting right now.
But I would also think that you as a casting director, you have to take your cue from the director.
You do. And it's also, as a not-for-profit theater, we have to take our cue from the director. But there are times when you say to a director, if the show is obviously open to that, musicals in particular are good for this. Shakespeare, because it's not a world where you're actually recreating the world. It is in many ways a non-realistic setting. Then why not? Right. You know, and then you get into so it's something you do try to force on a director if you think it is appropriate. But more often than not, again, you have to accept the director's vision and accept the way he wants to do the show.
Are there actors' equity rules about multiracial or colorblind?
There actually aren't. I mean, there are. As a not-for-profit theater, every year you have to fill out a quota form. You have to tell them how many minority actors you have hired, and it becomes a sticking point. Mm-hmm. But it is not. There are no quotas. I mean, the rules aren't that strict.
Do you, as casting director, negotiate any of the contracts with the actors?
With the Roundabout, I do.
Although not a lot of negotiating.
There's not a lot of negotiating. Excuse me. It's basically, I do salary and billing, which are the only two things. I mean, it's basically, this is what we're doing for this role, and this is what the billing is. Excuse me. And that's it. In the commercial world, I don't have anything to do with it. Again, you often become the middleman, even in a negotiation. If it's particularly heated between the general manager and the agent, you oftentimes are called upon to step in and try to bring reason or let the director know what's going on, because the general manager won't necessarily let the director know, and the director can then kind of come in and say, no, I must have this actor, you must agree to these terms, or say to the director, to the agent, "You're not going to get this. Give this battle up, or you're going to lose this job."
Right.
So again, you're a middleman.
And at the end of a day of auditions, when you sit down with the director and the producer, and they say, "Okay, this is the person that we want to cast," then
Right.
you're the one who tells the general manager, or you call the agent. How does that?
If it's I do both. I call the agent and I fax to the general manager. We fax offer memos. If it's a commercial show, you fax an offer memo so that you have the name of the actor, the name of the role, the agent, all the agent's contact information, and the actor's resume, so that the general manager knows what level of actor they're dealing with when they go to negotiate a contract in a commercial setting, because it does make a big difference, you know.
And do you usually give agents an inkling of whether their client is looking good?
You have to. I mean, the worst thing in the world would be to walk out of an initial audition session, because basically what you have is an initial set of auditions. And then for the most part, one set of finals. Now, that also depends on the director. Many directors do numerous sets of callbacks. But you hope to try to build it up to one day of finals. And if someone's come in on an initial day, you must run to the phone and say, "We are very interested in this actor. Please don't let them go anywhere until we have our callbacks." Because you don't want to lose that actor in the interim. Obviously, if they get a TV or film job, you lose the actor.
Right.
But basically what you're hoping to do is stake that claim in so that if any other theater jobs come up,
At least you're there.
you're there. And if they're really interested in an actor and they do have another job and have to make a decision, can we go ahead and make an offer? Do we do a special session to see this actor again? Those sorts of things.
Now, I have been singularly impressed with the cast that you have assembled. I assume you have assembled for Cabaret, since it's now been running for 4 years.
Right.
When a show like that works, and you know, obviously people knew around the opening that this was going to be a good show and it was going to run for a while, do you go back to your old lists when you have to replace them, or do you throw them away and start all over again now that actors have really solidly made the character and the part?
Well, it depends on... Things can be redefined, but in a show like Cabaret that's run now for, I think we're going into our 5th year now, there are roles that can become different ways, and as you're on your 12th Sally Bowles, you will think of a different way to go. You know, that's one of the jobs of trying to keep a show fresh.
But you've also found stars that I never would have dreamed that some of those people could even do it.
What's an interesting thing about that show is women really want to play Sally Bowles. And we've had great luck at getting stars to come in as a 9th replacement, a 10th replacement.
Do they audition? Will stars audition for that?
They all audition. A lot of what happened is they auditioned very early on. After the show was a big hit, we did quite a few auditions. I haven't had an audition for a Sally in 2 years, because the Sallys that we have cast have come from that set of auditions that we did when the show was at its peak of being hot. So... Whereas
even Molly Ringwald, someone like who's doing it now?
Yeah. They all auditioned back then.
Wow.
So, and then it's people we've said, okay, we like them, and then they wouldn't be available when we offered it to them, or the time wasn't right, and then the time becomes right. You know, we offered it to Brooke Shields 3 times before she said yes. Mm-hmm. So a long-running show can be a really difficult thing for a casting director, because particularly in a commercial not-for-profit or commercial setting, when you're in your 4th year, the battle cry becomes, get us a star, and we can stay open.
We need it for the box office.
We need it for the box office, and we need it to stay open. And so that becomes a challenge.
But also, Alan Cummings' performance was extraordinary, and I'd never seen anything like it. But how to replace him must have been quite a challenge.
It was a challenge, and interestingly enough, on that role, no stars wanted to do it. And Natasha was brilliant, Richardson, who originally played Sally and won the Tony, as well as Alan winning the Tony. The women were lining up. They all called. They all wanted to audition. They all wanted to play Sally. And I don't know if it's the ambisexuality of the character, but no stars. We've never had a star.
You're right. No, but
play. We've had up-and-coming Broadway actors play it. Michael Hall's also another good example of someone that was someone I saw early on and kept forcing him on directors and readings. And in fact, the way he got Cabaret was, I was casting a production with Sam Mendes of a Stephen Sondheim musical that hasn't happened yet, called Wise Guys. And we had used Michael in a reading, and we were stuck on an MC, and I hadn't thought of Michael, I have to say, because it wasn't a way I'd thought of doing it. And Sam turned to me and went, we should use Michael. Get Michael in here this afternoon, let's see him. I bet you he could do this role. And from doing the MC in Cabaret, he got 6 Feet Under, which is the HBO series he's currently on. So sometimes it's not, even though it's your idea in the beginning with the director, it becomes the director's idea eventually. But in the case of that show, stars didn't want to touch that role. But it's been nice because we've been able to maintain a star and an so that you have something for everyone. You have something for the New York theater goer who's always on the look for the interesting actor that they want to be among, hugely dependent on tourists, and a name that they recognize that they're comfortable coming to see.
Would you have been in the same position had the Follies production run?
We would have been.
With lists of people interested in doing the parts.
We would have been. I mean, we were, if Follies had been successful, I think it was the same thing we were counting on. Although in that show, of course, you have those smaller roles that you can fill with because it was very hard to cast those leads with stars.
Yeah.
You know, because again, certain ages are very difficult to get into the theater, and men in their 40s is probably, that's the single hardest. Men from 40 to 60, that's the most difficult age range to cast, because in that time in their lives, that is when men are most apt to be doing television and film and making a lot of money.
Right.
And that's always the toughest thing to cast.
Do you teach courses, and are there courses in casting?
Not in casting, no. I mean, it's an instinctual thing. You know, my courses and my teaching is hiring an intern and seeing if they work out.
On
the job. And it's mostly what casting directors will do. I don't do very many of these. My associates do quite a few of them. Is they will do one-on-ones with actors. Studios or groups of actors will hire casting directors to come in, watch scenes, and give critiques. Or I will go to talk to, Joanna Merlin's had me come in to talk to the NYU graduating class about how a casting director is going to affect an actor's life and stuff like that.
Because that's an audition class that Joanna Merlin teaches, Noah?
No, she teaches an acting class. So I will come into the graduating class and just answer questions about what does a casting director do, you know.
Do you see your roles sometime, I mean, you talked about it being the middleman, but also the actor coming into audition, I mean, it's a horrible situation. Do you sort of have the kid gloves?
That is, it's also physically you're the middleman. I mean, I am the person that brings someone into a room. So one of your biggest goals, one of my biggest goals, is always to keep both sides of the room calm and open. And it can be very difficult. You want to keep a good atmosphere in the room, in the audition room. You want to try to keep it light with the director and everyone else. That's hard sometimes, but you do your best. You don't want a chilly room. I've been very fortunate in that I've had very few chilly rooms. And as a casting
atmosphere,
it's an atmosphere, and it is set by the director. I mean, the casting director can, you know, again, that's a place where you change. There are more formal situations. There are directors who are incredibly informal, and therefore you can kind of do that kind of adapt your tone to that. The most important thing is when you go out into that room to bring an actor in, to seem calm, to seem welcoming, to seem, you know, that's never let them particularly see you be anxious, because it will only translate to the actor, and you don't want them to see that because it's a horrible situation for them.
What do you do if some college chum of yours now has a daughter who wants to be an actor in New York, and you get a telephone call, you've got to see my daughter?
You do it. Or more to the point, for me, it's when someone on the board has a daughter who wants to be a director.
Right.
Then you have to do it. And you sit and you talk to them and you answer their questions.
But do you also, I didn't mean to be quite that close in, but if there's somebody from a little bit, and and you think, well, I don't know if this is this person has either graduated, come from someplace that you wouldn't normally find it.
Right.
Do you send somebody in your office to see them work, or?
Well, no, if you're talking, I mean, one of the things that happens in a casting office is, I don't tend to go to the smaller, to the way off things. I don't.
Just because you don't have time.
I don't have time. I mean, if you're seeing 45 Broadway shows a year and an equal amount of those shows, and I go to London 2 or 3 times a year, and I tend to travel a lot to see shows in other cities, Chicago, Los Angeles, wherever.
So you
that
do,
is
yeah. It's just you do go to a lot of. It's just not the off Broadway kind of thing.
that isn't what I do. That is, in fact, what I have a staff to do. It depends on where you are in the scheme of things, and I count on my associates to do that, to be in touch with that sort of thing, and to come to me and say, I saw this kid in a showcase, and they're fantastic. You should see them, and then I'll bring them in for a pre-screen, or I will bring them directly in for the director, depending on what the situation is.
And do you get resumes daily?
Yes, which again the associates tend to look at. Although you'll get postcards from actors and I remember being stuck on a role on 1776, and I happened to get a postcard from an actor by the name of Richard Poe, who was going to be on an episode of Law and Order. And I went, "That's it. That's who we're looking for." And I don't know if I would have thought of Richard if I hadn't gotten that postcard. So, those things do happen.
So obviously, part of being a casting director is keeping your eyes and ears open to absolutely everything.
Everything, and not shutting out. And I think one of the traps we can fall into is not being open to new ideas and not being open to being more expansive. Again, I was talking to a director about this last night. There are certain directors that I have a relationship with where I can say to them, "Look, I don't know how this is going to work. This is from left field, but I want to give this a shot," or "This is a favor. I need to do this." If my relationship with the director is such that I can do that, I'll do that, and I'm much more open to seeing people I might not normally see. If it's a director on a very tight time frame, or on Copenhagen, in all cases, I think we saw 8 actors, maybe, for the original cast of Copenhagen, because Michael was very specific about what he wanted to see, and I knew I'll bring in these 2 and these 3 and this 2, and we cast it.
That makes it sound so easy, and it is on that note that we actually have to end. We could go on all afternoon, but thank you very much,
Thank you.
Jim. We've been talking with casting director Jim Carnahan. For the American Theater Wing, I'm Ted Chapin.
The American Theater Wing's Guide to Careers in the Theater is a project of the American Theater Wing and the New York Public Library's Billy Rose Theater Collection, Theater on Film and Tape Archive.